Right, let's get moving. All right, welcome back. We are INFR3335U in the fall 2021 semester at Ontario Tech University, Social and Multiplayer Game Design. And it's week 11, part one of our broadcast and recording. This week, we're talking about educational mobile games. We'll do a bit of an intro, very brief scratch the surface stuff on this one. This is a huge topic that is not just for mobile, but in general. You can expand this to include things like serious games and gamification. That could be a whole topic on its own. All right, so let's move into this. So here's where we're at this week. This is the second last week of class officially. So this week is officially the last lecture. That's when it's what's happening this week. Next week, there's no lecture, but we still have class as we're doing our final project presentations. The same final project presentations we'll be doing for GGW games and other games as well. So that's when it's happening next week. Next week is mandatory attendance. So please let your team know that everyone must attend in order for them to get marks for their final presentation. Even if you create the final presentation, unless there's a reason why you can't attend, the expectation is that you should be here and we should have full attendance for next week at least. Okay, at least full attendance virtually, remote. All right, so that is what the expectation is. Let's talk about what we did last week. We talked about game demographics and how to create mobile games for a specific demographic. We talked about that last week. We also did a couple of or tech demo that kind of encompassed how to do platform detection and how to implement on-screen controls and remove them when you're not on the correct platform. So that's what we did last week. And this week we're going to be talking about educational mobile games. We're going to do a brief case study on the tabletop gaming Warhammer 40K. And I've also got a bit of a tech demo plan for how to animate your UI and with Unity Animator Controller and the timeline. So there's some things that we can add in for your mobile game from that perspective. All right, what's due? Assignment 4, which is a group assignment, due week 11. That's this Sunday at midnight. And let's take a look at that before we move on. So I've kind of got that up and the details. I mean, it's nothing that is out of the ordinary that you haven't expected. So if you look at assignment 4, you have submitted, most of you have submitted your own homegrown game system that you did a few weeks ago. And this time, what you're asked to do is you're going to spend about an hour or two max as a group. All right. And this is like, it's not a long play test. What I'm looking for is a brief play test with a couple of different loadouts from your game system that you created a few weeks ago. So example, let's say you made a game system that requires some weapons and armor. It could be different kinds of weapons and armor as an example, but you're going to be doing a play test combat where you're going to have a couple of loadouts, and I recommend a couple of different sets of primary, secondary ability combinations. So example would be something like, let's say, a strong character loadout with strength-based weapons versus an agile character loadout with a finesse kind of weapon, as an example. So that would be the way you would do it. You can try out different combinations. Again, I don't need an exhaustive play test, but just an idea, to get an idea of how this thing works that you've put together, because you and your team should have put it together for the last assignment, assignment 3. All right, so very brief. And then, again, there's no DM required. So this is not a role-playing test or something like that. You need to do some kind of remote role-playing unless somehow you're able to get together. If you feel comfortable doing that at this point in time in the semester. You may choose to use a communication tool similar to what you used last time. I'm not going to force you to use one thing or another. As an example, play test the combat, and then you're going to make a brief report, really super brief, about after the play test. And I mean, a short report including how your game system worked, critique it, what I'm looking for, a few critiques, and some recommendations, at least 3 recommendations. So it could be like basically a paragraph for this report on how things went, how things didn't go well, what would you have done differently. You can include screenshots and images if you want to make your submission stronger. And of course, include all your group members' names and everything else. I need a small, and I mean a short PDF document, like a page max, 250 words, let's say to 500 words. That's what it would be for this thing max. And let me actually put that in the details here just before I forget, because I should have included that. So again, 250 to 500 words max. Okay, that's what I'm hoping that you will include. So very brief. Again, it's only worth 5% of your final grade, so I don't expect it to be like super exhaustive or anything like that. And a PDF copy of each test character recorded on your custom character sheet they should have kind of created for assignment 3. So things like, I have a warrior that's a, kind of a heavy weapon loadout. And then I have another one that is a finesse loadout. Show me those two characters. What do they look like in your game system that you've created? The things that I'm looking for really are a reflection, really very brief. Could you bring this system into your own mobile game? How would this work for the narrative that you might create for your campaign? Those kind of thoughts, I think you can also add in your report. But again, very brief, guys. This is just the kind of the finalization of the whole role-playing thing that we've been working on this entire semester. And so that's what I'm looking for. An hour, maybe 30 minutes to create your characters, the little loadouts. You could have one person do that, and then a couple people playing the characters, other people taking notes and creating the documentation and critiquing. It could like literally take an hour and a half max, and you're done. Okay, so nothing too crazy, please. I'm not looking for an exhaustive report. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for this Sunday, and that'll finalize all the assignments, for the assignment section of this course. On that, I've also released Project Part 4 and Project Part 5. This is the final 2 pieces of your project requirements for this course that tie into your GDW game. So Project Part 4, let's take a look at that. So if we look at that one, it's nothing that you wouldn't have expected, okay? So it's the final release. What I'm looking for, again, I'm being vague here on purpose because this is kind of tying in the final version of your game. I'm looking for your final game design document, as many assets to make the game functional. Your main mechanic, any kind of main mechanic or uniqueness for the game should be included at this point, and those kind of things. So any kind of graphics, sounds, all that stuff should be acquired to kind of make 100% of your level. We're only looking for one level, and I mean when I say 100%, I mean like as best as you can make it. Okay, for this semester, and again, it's going to be built with a mobile build target in mind, so not a WebGL build target, similar to what you did in Project Part 3, which is your third playable release, or the other playable release that you had. An updated game design document as normal, version control as normal, your project management update as normal. So again, just an update to your task boards and those things, a couple screenshots around that. And then for submission requirements, you're going to include a PDF document of your game design document, a working link to your team's GitHub repo, and one or more screenshots of your current backlog and sprint backlog and your task board. That is all due not this week, but actually this is due at the end of next week, so December 3rd. So all this is a culmination of all the documentation and the game files and all that stuff that is required to kind of patch up your game. You're going to submit all that to me by next week. And that would be due again at the end of the week 12, December 3rd. Okay. However, next week when we get together, again, no lecture, but you'll be actually doing your final presentation. So again, this is due a different time. Okay. It's not the same week, same week, but different day. This is going to be due. The last minute you can submit is just before your presentation next week on Wednesday. So that means it's due 6:40 p.m. on Wednesday next week. That's what I'm asking for you guys to do. And your team will present the final release of your game for this semester. Your presentation should include details contained in your game design document, such as an overview of your game, your planning process, lessons learned, future possibilities. You must be prepared to present live. Use a slide deck during the presentation to keep you organized. Your presentation should be no longer than 15 minutes, thereabouts. Your presentation will be evaluated on the quality of your presentation materials, the body copy, spelling, grammar, visual appeal, all that kind of stuff. Presentation style, timing, clarity, vocal tone, and comfort with the material. the quality of your game demo and your game concept. What is that, this thing that you're trying to make for the semester? Note, each team member must be present for the presentation to get credit, okay? So is this for our GW game, right? Not for the mobile game. No, this is for the mobile game that you've been creating for me. All right, that's what I'm looking for. So hopefully it's tied into the GDW game. It's the same. It's almost like the mobile version of your GDW game, if it's possible. If you're making the volumetric combat game, then obviously you're going to make it for the mobile game. That's what I'm hoping that you'd be creating, because that's what I care about, right? It's the mobile version of your GDW game, if that's possible, or the mobile game that you've made for me for this course. That's what you're doing. Okay, that's what the project is all about. All right, so your presentation slide deck should include your title page, roles, influences what made you feel like making this game. You know, a game overview. What game have you made? Your game story synopsis, and narrative design. You should kind of have that into that as well. Do we need multiplayer in our mobile game? The answer is no. I mean, it'd be nice if you had it, but I'm not going to make it required, because as you see, there's no mobile requirement. I know that Stephen has been working with you to create mobile components for his in-lab exercises, and that might come out. I know that he talked to you this week about your final practical exam, that there will be mobile components and multiplayer components on there, but I'm not going to request them for your game if it's not applicable. Okay, so that's the answer. I'm not going to kill you, in other words, with additional requirements at the last minute. All right, so presentation slide deck that includes all these things: MDA, target audience, and demographic. We've talked about these. You should have an intro to your game demo. Again, there's a couple ways you can do your game demo. You can actually use your live, your kind of like your pre-recorded link if you want to do that. So you can pre-record it and then just let it play for all of us. Or you can do it live. I would accept either one. Lessons learned slide and a future possibility slide should all be included in your slide deck. You need to record a demo anyway, and your gameplay video. So this is like you basically voicing over your slide deck, your presentation slide deck, and then doing a short game demo. Again, I don't expect it to be professional quality. I'm not looking for edits or any kind of lower thirds or professional editing from you in any way. This is just a culmination of the stuff that you've worked on for me for this semester that you're putting together and you're demonstrating. Okay, so you need to make a video anyway, but if you'd like, instead of you actually going through the presentation materials live, if you feel nervous about that or whatever, you can make a nice video, and then we can just go through the video kind of throughout the next week's time frame. Yeah, I don't think so, Aim. I think it's a little bit crazy for us to ask you to do multiplayer, kind of within a week. I mean, I know that you've had the basics of creating a lobby and connecting with Photon and all that stuff. Awesome. Great. And that might help you for next semester as you kind of prototype those interactions, because I know next semester there is a multiplayer component for your networking and multiplayer course that you're doing, because that's what you're doing next semester for a different course, right? So that's something that you're going to have to come up with anyway. But I know you're going to make a homegrown networking system, right, in that course. But this one will allow you to create things like lobbies and the interface. And I'm hoping that's what it helped you with, to think about how to create an interface that works for mobile. But the same interface that works for mobile can be used for a desktop version of the game. You just have to expand it and change your canvas settings in Unity. All right, so that's what I'm hoping. But in terms of for the requirements for me, no, multiplayer is not required. Okay, only a mobile build is required. Okay, so yeah, you made that requirement up in your head. No requirements like that. So after you present, that's nice. You'll be judged on a couple of things. So again, the slide deck materials, your gameplay video, as well as the live presentation. Now, if you do your live presentation by showing the video and it's good, you'll be judged on quality of your voice output, the materials that you're using, all that stuff. Again, what I'm looking for is, when I say live, I mean that you're actually either projecting your recording live, so you're here, your group is here with me as well, or you're actually presenting live, feel comfortable doing that, there may be questions that I might ask or questions from other people as well. But we'll try and keep it brief because I don't want to kill you guys. Again, if each of us, each of the teams do like 15 minutes, I think it'll take most of the time that we'll have together anyway. And then we'll do a short, kind of some information about your final exam, both on the practical and written side. Okay, that's what's happening, and that's what's coming forward for next week. Okay. AIM also says, yeah, it's useful to know, but yeah, some of the systems I've had to build for my game will break some of the photon syncing. So yeah, great. So again, not required, but it's good. It's good that you guys have had a chance to take a look at those components, so that you can add them in, into your game potentially for next semester, and at least have a nice user interface that works for both mobile and desktop. That's the idea behind it. All right, so those are all the final requirements for everything that's happening in this course so far, other than your final exam. Again, we'll go over that next week. Okay, when I say I will go over it next week, I mean I will release the details to you in hopefully their entirety. You'll have a chance to start your final exam as soon as you're done that week. It'll be released to you. You can start working on it. Stephen is coming up with a starter application that you can download from. You'll be able to download from GitHub. So you're not going to start with kind of scratch. You're going to start with something to get you guys going on it. Again, for the demo, I mean, I'd like to see it in LD player or even on your phone. If you can make it work on your phone with Visor, that's Visor with a Y, VYSOR. It's up to you how you want to do it. But yeah, I know some people have been reporting some weird stuff with LD player. If you want to side load it and use something like BlueStacks or something else, it's up to you. LD player just makes it a lot easier because you're able to play it, and you can use both touch input as well as keyboard and mouse input. Those two things work, so you can kind of really test your game out. So to me, I'm going to say I'll leave it to you. I mean, obviously playing it in Unity is not going to be the same fidelity. It won't look like a mobile game, so I prefer it in an emulator if possible. Okay, worst case, if you can't make it work, again, I'm not going to kill you guys on this because it's supposed to be a good learning experience, but I'm not going to say, well, if you don't do it in LD player, then you fail. That doesn't make sense, right? So to me, it's like, do whatever you can. I'm hoping that you guys can do it in LD player or some kind of emulator or an actual phone. That's what my hope is for next week. And I'm saying hope because, again, it really depends on the tech. Can you pull it off? How does it work? Sometimes things work in Unity, but they don't work on an emulator so well. And so I'm hoping it will. And if you can, that's great. Obviously, you're going to get better marks for it. Okay. And any other questions around the stuff that's due over this week and next week? Again, I don't think this week's requirements are that terrible. I mean, it's just really getting together with your team, and you're going to get together with them anyway. Doing a little silly report for me, I think, is going to be fun, and you might have a fun time testing out your little homegrown game system. I think that might be fun to do. And there's some real great learnings from doing that because you can take it away and maybe incorporate it into a future game that you're going to be making together. All right, so that's it for this. Any other questions before we move on to the content for today? All right, so we're talking today about an intro into educational mobile games and what that's all about. Again, this is a huge topic that I cannot possibly do justice to in a single class, okay? Huge topic. It could be the topic of many lectures, not just one. In fact, we can have a whole course on educational games and gamification and serious games. And I know that Bill Capralos, Professor Capralos, he has several other courses that he has on gamification and serious gaming and all that kind of stuff. And I think this part right here of our lecture series kind of wraps into and ties into his stuff. So a lot of the stuff I've been trying to do this semester for you guys can tie into other courses, can tie into engines, can tie into games user research, can tie into Bill's, serious gaming courses and those kind of things. So if you're interested in those kind of things, at least you'll have a little bit of an intro to some of that stuff, and as well as mobile gaming or mobile game design, which we know is huge, right, in our marketplace. So again, one thing that we have to think about is educational games have been around nearly as long as all the video games, combined. Like since the beginning, we've had educational games. Even back in the day when I was a lot younger, we had video games on, kind of our PCs and so on back then, and even and on consoles and so on. They've been around forever and ever and ever. But the problem is, how do you get it right? Right. So one thing that they have is they have definitely a unique value proposition. And I think that the idea here with the unique value proposition is it's another target market for you guys. Hey, here's another course that this thing ties into. This ties into the business of gaming, which is something that you're going to be doing as well. So again, this course ties into all those three things. Imagine making a use case to create a mobile game for your business of gaming course. The stuff that I'm talking about in this course kind of works nicely in that. So again, so we're going to start talking about, how to do stuff for learning games. And there's some issues. We're going to talk about the issues, positives and negatives. One great thing about educational content, which helps us make games, is it's all about personalized learning. Okay, so whenever I make the difference between having a, kind of a classroom type learning and making a learning game is in a classroom, every student is an individual, yes, and yet most formal education takes place at a low ratio. Again, one teacher to like 20 to 30 students, and in a regular classroom, as an example. And here's an example of us, right? This is just me, one professor, and there's more than 40 of you, right, in our class, right? So that's a lot of people for one person. Again, luckily I have an assistant, so a teaching assistant, which is awesome, and Stephen's been awesome this semester for me, and I'm sure you guys have enjoyed him too. But imagine that the average teacher, one person, 30 students, right? A lot of very low teacher-student ratio, like a really bad teacher-student ratio. Whereas video games, it's a one-to-one relationship, learner and learning material, right? So that's a good thing. Now, again, we can have dynamically adapting materials that adapt to the learner. So, and the learner can go at their own pace, go through the material at their own pace. And the idea here is that we're using something called personalized learning, which is in some ways, if you think about it, in an ideal world, okay, we're not in an ideal world, but in an ideal world where we had the perfect materials for each person, customized for each person. In other words, sometimes I always think about like personalized learning as almost like personalized medicine in some ways, right? Like we take medicine today, we go to a pharmacy, we take medicine, and it's for the general person. Who is that? There is no general person, right? It's the same thing when it comes to learning. We have learning for us, and it's for the general person, right? It's like for everybody, but everyone learns differently. Everyone comes from different cultures, different backgrounds, different foundations. Some people are more ahead in others in different kinds, different disciplines, and so on. So how do you, as a teacher, kind of target everybody in your classroom, get everybody attention, and do, kind of focus on learning rather than on babysitting, right? For the most part. And we can, in the future, if we think about this, if we all can, transform, or maybe teleport ourselves, through the multiverse and go into a future realm where, we have the technology that every kid, every child, and every adult learner, doesn't matter where you are able to connect. And I'm not talking the metaverse. Please, let's not say those words. I think, the whole Meta Facebook thing that's been coming out lately has put a bad taste in my mouth. But what I mean is that the whole idea of connecting with each other in some way with a piece of technology that is a future piece of technology that exists, like not now, but maybe at some point in the future, that allows us to learn in a customized way that engages us because we have no choice but to be engaged, right, with it. And I think that it's something that, I would be looking forward to in the future, not just as an educator, but also as a student myself, right? Because I always like to learn. I think one of the beautiful things about being a professor is the constant learning that I'm going through, right? I have to tell you though that just as an aside, this semester I've got like no skill points left. I cannot level up. I am like tapped out, just like you guys, right? In terms of the amount of work that's come at me, completely unprecedented in terms of what I thought it would be compared to what it is. And this is what we all go through, right? Because we're going through so many things remote. One day, I really believe it's going to be better. And it's going to be through this personalized learning that we're talking about. So one of the things that's really great about mobile games is failing forward, which is another kind of, I don't know, buzz phrase, if you will. Again, one of the things that we talk about is we want to fail early, right? Whenever we're learning something, fail early, fail often. Actually, Steve Jobs talked about that. And that's kind of a great way to learn, by experimentation, by trying things that haven't been tried before, by kind of exploration and those kind of things. And I think that's an amazing opportunity for everybody to try and do something that they haven't had a chance to do, push themselves to a point where they're going to fail. But in failure, we learn. We learn more from failure than from success, as the saying goes, right? So the idea is fail forward, right? So kind of really kind of engage and have a chance to restart. And one of the things when it comes to gamified educational experience is the ability for you to restart, right? You can always restart. You can always learn that again. You can always go back and keep doing it until you're done. A lot of times in educational games, you have unlimited lives and unlimited attempts. And some people might say, well, that's bad because, why should you have unlimited attempts? You're not really being challenged. But the reality is, we're trying to pick up a new skill a lot of times, right? And even in a normal game, let's suppose you pick up the latest game that you're learning to play right now. Let's say something like Halo Infinite. I mean, I don't know anyone who hasn't died in that game, right? So, it's just that's just the way we learn. We learn by doing. We learn by failure, and so that's how it works. The other thing is we have to also consider things like the modern media language. Okay, modern kids today. Okay, not kids when you were kids or kids when I was a kid, right? But kids today, they're in this new media space where educational content is happening through their video games, whether you want it or not. Okay, they're learning stuff through video games, through YouTube, through media. Like I mentioned last week, they don't care so much about watching programs that are where we are not engaged. They care more about kind of having something that's interactive that they want to learn. They want to be kind of directing their learning. That's where they feel most engaged. And that's why some kids are having a lot of difficulty in the regular school program now, especially during COVID. They're in school and they're having trouble learning because it's coming at them in a way that they don't want. They want to fast forward the teacher, they fast forward the professor, and you can't do that, right? Well, you can if you watch the video and fast forward, but in kind of an asynchronous learning environment, it's totally different than what we're used to, especially for kids. So when it comes to specific subjects, video games have this great leverage because of other intrinsic qualities, okay? Video games are dynamic, they're interactive, and they're super patient. Think about that, right? It's all around this idea of moving media, right? And that things can change over time and you can show progression. They're interactive because all learning video games are first person, right? It's directly experiential. They're not something that you learn, by someone else doing it necessarily. You're doing it if it's the right kind of game for you, right? And they're super patient because guess what? Games have infinite patience. Okay, it's not like you're going to have the game is going to have limited patience unless it's on a timer, let's say, because they're trying to time you to get you faster and faster until you're able to kind of get to that next level. And there you go. So Matthew says they're best. So pretty much whenever I can, I watch videos at 1.5 to 2 times speed. Matthew, I'm exactly the same as you, right? We're all like that. And, my wife and my kids, they say to me, Dad, how the heck can you watch it that fast at 2 times speed? It sounds like squirrel speed, that's coming at you. And I'm like, yeah, but I already know the subject. So for me to take a look at something, even if it's a bat rep report on Warhammer 40K, I can watch it super fast as an example, and I'm able to retain a lot of what's happening. It's almost like I'm skimming through the video, but I'm getting most of the stuff that I'm getting through like 1.5 to 2 times speed, depending on how fast the narrator or the person who's talking in the video speaks. If they're really, really slow, I can go to 2 times, no problem. Yeah, exactly, Aim. It depends on the video for me, right? A lot of times I really struggle at normal speed as well because I find that the rate of information download for me is just too slow when it comes to a regular video. And that's why it drives me crazy when I watch a news program. I want that news program to come at me as fast as I want it, and I just can't get it that fast unless I watch it on YouTube or I watch it somewhere else where it's pre-recorded and I can watch it right away at whatever speed I want. So I can consume data just like you. I'm a child of the internet, right? I can consume data super fast, and so can all of our learners. That's one thing you have to consider. There's a different set of learners that are coming on. That means a different demographic of children that we've had from before, which is going to create a different demographic of adults, adult learners and adult gamers coming forward. And we have a chance to to ride that wave and tag into it, right? So that's really cool. So one thing that we can do is we can recognize kind of the strengths and weaknesses of video games for education. Right now, we're going to talk about the current market, not some kind of space age, futuristic kind of technology that we have coming out that's going to make learning awesome. All right, but we're going to be able to do a couple things. One is we can use high quality content generation tools like you've been using this semester. The Unity game engine is a great example. All right, you can create content quickly. Heck, you can even create content with no code, low code. That's part of your game engine class. You might be learning about that in game engines as an example. And that means that anybody can create this stuff. Anybody, whether you're a programmer or a technical artist, with very low code or no code, using things like code blocks. You can create an educational game. Heck, even kids can create games for other kids with kind of like that low code or no code, Scratch-like programming. So here's something that we have to think about. Interaction affordances of mobile games are unique. One of the things that we're going to always have, and this is kind of a review of what we've talked about so far, is physical actions. We're able to use gestures, and that's a lot different than what we have, for example, keyboard and mouse. Okay, keyboard and mouse is great for PCs, but most kids, as they're learning, because that's where we're targeting, we're talking about kids right now, and actually even older adults and younger kids, that's a big demographic right there, two big kind of overlapping demographics that are very different, right? They may not have comfort yet, kind of interacting with the PC, so that you can use something like a tablet or a mobile phone, which right now are pervasive. There's lots of tablets and mobile phones out there. Almost everyone has one, right, as an example, especially when you're an older person. We talked about that last week with the demographics report that we did, right? And so think about those two people. Very, older learners, they can use a tablet or mobile phone, and they can use physical actions like gestures that are very different in terms of learning than we use with a PC or Mac. You can't really do it with consoles in the same way either, right? So this is all about mobile. What's special about mobile? Limitations to keep in mind. We talked about these already. Here's a brief review. Touchscreens, again, that are multi-touch. So we're directly touching things like artwork and stuff that's on the screen. Screen sizes are a lot smaller, but when it comes to developing for mobile, we have to consider different screen sizes and different safe areas that we've talked about this semester. So how do we do that? That's a consideration. Limited time and attention. We've talked about that from before. So we said that, we're on borrowed time here for mobile games. Same with the kids, right? If you're a learner and you're, using a mobile learning game or something like that you want to do, whether you're, a child or an adult, doesn't matter. We have limited time. And when it comes to games, even for kids, they have a limited amount of attention, right? Why? Well, we'll talk about it. But for the most part, most mobile learning games are boring, right? Software keyboards. That's another issue. Software keyboards are pervasive right now in the ability for us to connect and add data into our mobile devices, and they really suck. They're terrible. We peck at them. Even if you have an on-screen keyboard like this, they're not great. All right, and especially in media like VR, if you're in a VR or an immersive environment, a software keyboard or virtual keyboard is terrible. It's the worst thing you can possibly do in VR because for the most part, there's very little feedback. It doesn't feel like a keyboard, it doesn't respond like a keyboard. You miss the keyboard. Even on a touchscreen, you can miss the keys or overlap keys from one thing to the other. It's way different than a real keyboard, and that's something that we need to improve over time. Intermittent internet, even though for the most part, our internet is pretty pervasive. If you're at home, you've probably got Wi-Fi now. If you're on a bus, though, and I'm not saying you're going to learn on a bus, but even if you're in school, sometimes that internet can be spotty, man. And especially if there's a lot of learners in the same classroom using the same access points, that can be really super slow, especially if you're doing things like downloading video content along with your learning tools and those kind of things. It can be super slow. And we haven't seen that because we're working from home right now for the most part. But even from home, sometimes I spark out when I'm presenting to you guys. Why? Because it's a single source that's kind of being distributed across the internet, and even that can be spotty. All right, so that's kind of a tool limitation as well. Other considerations, okay? A wide age demographic. This is a good thing, actually. So those things are limitations. This is maybe some positives in terms of how we can use mobile tools for learning, right? So a wide age demographic. So again, we can have learners from 0 to 100 years old or more. And why? Because anyone can learn with a mobile device. Anybody, all right? Here's something else. The buyer is probably not the player, okay? Especially for youth or children. A lot of times they're pushed to get an educational game, whether it's on console or a mobile device. They're pushed by their parents, and they get this educational game that the parents think are that's very cool, but actually it is a terrible game for the most part. And I'm saying that because most games, there's some limited amount. We're going to talk about why it's bad and what we can do. This is a great opportunity for all of us because we're game designers, we're game developers, and you're in a space where there is a great demand for educational games, a huge demand, especially in all walks of life. All right, from different things. You want to learn a skill? You can do a lot of learning right through mobile games. All right, so we'll talk about that. Wide socioeconomic demographics. That means that they're depending on who wants to buy the game, and depending on the cultural demographics and some of their financial kind of foundations. Parent buyers might have radically different goals and preferences with regard to their educational software. They might say, well, I want a really cheap game that, kind of does what it's going to do for my kid, or free. I want it to be free. It's kind of, offered up by the district school board, or it's offered up by the university. I don't want to pay anything for my game. A good example of this is I'm sure you guys may have done a simulation with one of your business courses where you do a business simulation. You guys do that yet? It's a business simulation on, kind of funding and, kind of, angel investors and all that kind of stuff, and doing the whole business simulation altogether. It's a gamified experience. And one of our professors, Malcolm, a lot of times he would do these kind of gamified experience. I'll tell you, we had to buy that, when I was at Ontario Tech for my undergrad, I had to do, this one thing. I had to buy into this simulation. And guys, the simulation was an old website that was terrible. It was the worst simulation I've ever done, ever, right? But we had to do it. And there was a lot of complaints that year. There was a lot of complaints that I shouldn't be required to pay money to do, to finish my course. I've already paid money to do my course. I've got a lot of stuff happening. Why do I have to buy this other piece of software that is spotty at best, and that is a terrible example of my simulation, right? Which doesn't really kind of, work all the time. So that's something that we have to think about. Social, economic demographics. For students, we have very little money, all of us, very little. We're always taxed on spending money for different things. We have device requirements, hardware requirements, internet requirements, travel requirements, and there's a bunch of other stuff, plus paying for our tuition and everything else that makes our financial situation very, very slim. Yeah, it is standard to pay for textbooks, I know, but at the end of the day, you know what? That's becoming less and less a thing too, Matthew, right? Because at the end of the day, you can get a lot of textbooks for free, used, and everything else that's out there right now, or a lot of the documentation, especially for technical courses like ours, technical programs. Even a lot of that can be you can acquire that online. Like the latest documentation for Unity, that's online. You're not going to buy a book on Unity. Chances are, you might have the best tutorials online for on YouTube for Unity and Unreal, right? The best tutorials, right? So instead of buying a book, right? So a lot of that is kind of going down. It's the other stuff. Imagine if you need to have the Adobe software, kind of, and you have to pay for it. You have to pay $30 a month because it's required for you and your program. It doesn't seem like a lot, but $30 a month US could be a lot. Okay, so it really depends on the person, is what I'm saying here. So again, challenging financial models. Most mobile games still operate on a sample basis with the light edition that's offered for free, and they're loaded with upsell opportunities, to get the paid app. Okay, so that is kind of other considerations for mobile. The last thing is, this is kind of, it may not be directly related to design for a learning experience, but what they are is they create a critical context in which to understand your goals and your constraint space. Because when it comes to designing for mobile games for education, we have different constraints, even more constraints than we do for regular mobile games. Okay, so that's kind of my little preamble starting off. Let's think about design principles for educational mobile games. Okay, so here's something. Learning as storytelling. So let's think about learning in general, like back in the day. And I wish I had some images here that I had time to put into the documents. I'm sorry that they're text heavy, but it is what it is. But when we think about educational content, it's really important to remember language. Language is the central way that we're able to communicate our human experience. Back in the, maybe the Elden days, we'll use the Elden as the word, right? We were around these campfires and we used our oral kind of experience to talk from one person to the other and pass down experiences, from people that were senior in the group to people who were junior in the group. All right. And we used language in order for us to do that. And as we're able to improve our language, we realized that when we bridge the gap in experience between someone who is experienced and someone who is new or novice at some kind of skill or at life, it gave us a bit of immortality, right? Because you could say that I learned this skill from this master or this person who did this a lot in their lives, right? And it allowed us to adapt and evolve beyond our regular biology. Why? Because we can pass down things from, father to son to daughter, as an example. That's how it used to be done. And it was an oral tradition of learning. That's where it was. And one thing that we realized is we're able to transfer that knowledge without actually requiring any firsthand experience. We can transfer some knowledge, right? Knowledge that is super important that you couldn't possibly gain on your own, right? We're bridging the gap, not only bridging the gap, but creating a catalyst, right? From someone learning it on their own through the school of hard knocks. So in other words, going out there and experiencing failure and all that kind of stuff. And through this way of communicating through language. So again, around campfires, where we or whatever, or around the kitchen table, we're able to communicate those things. And then we developed storytelling. And what this allowed us to do is compress this learning and make it more efficient and more memorable, which is the main thing, right? So it was a lot different than just relating how to do something, right? Hey, when you chop wood, you pick up an axe and you do it. But instead of doing that way, if you're talking about how to chop wood properly, you tell the story, right? One of the stories I remember hearing in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I'm not sure if you've heard this one, is this idea of, sharpening your axe, right? I don't know if you guys have ever heard this story, but this was the story that was told in the book, right? There's these two woodcutters, all right? And they might have said it differently. I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not going to read it to you, but basically these two woodcutters, and there's a young woodcutter and an older woodcutter. The young woodcutter is a very buff, strong person, right? They're very, capable and strong, and they have bigger hands. They're actually physically bigger than the older person. The older person is experienced, and they've been cutting wood for, a couple of decades or several decades or whatever. and they're there alongside with the younger woodcutter. And the younger woodcutter is someone who is ambitious and proud, and they know that they can cut a lot of wood because they're physically strong. So they're just going at it and they're chopping wood, and they develop this huge pile of wood, right? And they're competing with the older person. They're saying, "Ha, look at this old guy. He's sitting down half the time, and I can, produce wood faster than they can. I don't even know why they have this old guy here. He's dead wood. We should get him out of here, right? We should have young guys like us go through and chop wood as fast as possible. We're strong, we're bigger, we're better than the previous generation." And he kept on seeing this guy sitting down half the time and taking breaks, right? And he couldn't understand it because when he looked at him, his pile of wood that he had on his side was bigger than the pile of wood that this young guy was chopping. He just couldn't understand how this was done. He kept on chopping and chopping. He even put on the steam. He was chopping even faster, as fast as he could, right? But still, at the end of the day, when he came to the old guy, he said, "I don't understand it." He says, "You were sitting down half the time," he says, "and I was just chopping. I'm bigger than you. I'm stronger than you. I'm younger than you. And I saw you sitting, but somehow you're able to, to chop more wood than me. How did you do it?" How did he do it, guys? You should know this story. He says, "Young man, because when I was sitting down, I was sharpening my axe." That's the story. And yeah, using a chainsaw is awesome. But no, he was sharpening his axe, right? And the sharpening the axe thing, that sharpening the axe story, guys, I remember that story from the first time I read that book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, as an example. And that was a long time ago. I read that book when it first came out, years and years and years ago. But I still remember that story. Why? It resonates with me. That's storytelling. It allows us to compress the experience of some person. Instead of them telling you things like, "Guy, whenever you go sharpen your axe because you're going to make it better," the story itself is a thing that's able to tell us how to do it. He's a pay-to-play player. That's right. So that's kind of the story that I want to tell you about this. The idea of compression. Storytelling is a form of knowledge transfer or compression that we want to use in order for us to transfer our knowledge from someone who knows to someone who does not. While I was swinging your arms, I was sharpening my blade. Yeah, that was perfect, right? Guy stole his wood. Could be. I like those options. So really, the idea of this human sense of how a story should go is directly connected to this learning process. All right. So story techniques that we've used, that we've talked about, this idea of the hero's journey, things like the inevitable surprise, reversal, foreshadowing, dramatic reveals, call to adventure, escalation, crisis, the return, master of both worlds, all that kind of stuff that we talk about in the things that we talked about last time, which was all around, not just demographics, but we also touched very, very briefly on things like stereotypes, as well as, stock characters. And we also talked last week about, kind of this prototypal character prototypes that we want to use, or archetypes, if you will, right? All that stuff is intuitive to us. We've heard stories before, right? And, the idea is that when we learn things through stories, it can be a transformative experience. That's why we come to school. That's why we do stuff. So again, often we have these things through storytelling. Okay, here's another one, all right, where you get together with a bunch of your friends around, a dinner table or a bar or whatever. I mean, this is a common cliche, but it happens, right? We all get together and you wax nostalgic. You say, "Remember that time when, you did that crazy thing you did?" And, you talk about this stuff, and even with new people that weren't even there. And you talk about this stuff and talk about it. And what ends up happening is that other people that weren't actually engaged in the experience learn about what you did, right? And that's how it is. And it could be transformative. It could be something where you actually start understanding the other person by the way they're talking about the story, and you learn about each other. So that's kind of interesting background, how storytelling really is the central thing when it comes to learning in many ways, right? Characterization is another really great compression technique. When we characterize, when we actually start putting putting together bits of a story, things like the protagonist, which is really exists to personify certain characteristics and world beliefs. Again, it's a compression method. It's a way of us transferring knowledge, the parables of old, the myths that were told to us, as an example, in different cultures. A lot of these things were done, and the protagonist personified certain beliefs or certain ethos, certain morals, if you will, that that the community was striving to achieve a lot of times, right? Sometimes the character, and most of the time, the great characters were flawed because it was a learning, device. That's what it was. It was us learning through this hero where we're learning in a safe environment, right? It's not us going through the adventure. We're listening to the hero going through the adventure. And in effect, we're learning about how we would do things differently. We would almost sometimes think that young guy who was chopping wood, what an idiot. Why didn't he look at the old man and see what he was doing, right? We can start thinking about, what we would do differently. And that's, again, with zero risk to ourselves at all. We weren't there chopping wood, right? There's dangers in chopping wood. You can chop your leg off if you're not careful, right? You can hurt yourself if you're not careful, right? So those kind of things, that's why stories are so powerful. And the beliefs that this, the hero personifies, they come in conflict with the world as it really is through plot. So plot is the conflict that the hero, that's personifying our beliefs, the things that we want to teach everybody, that's the conflict. What was the conflict in the story with the axe, the young man and the old man, right? Again, we have some archetypes. The old man, right, could be seen as, again, this old man, the sage, the mentor. The young man, he's making mistakes, right? He's making mistakes. He thinks that he knows what he's doing, but actually, this is a trial for him, right? And the challenge, think about the thing is, he's challenging himself. He's bringing that challenge onto himself, saying, I can beat you, old man, right? But the reality is he doesn't know what the old man knows. That's the thing. And in that conflict, his challenge to the old man, right, is kind of a reflection on the world in some ways, right? Secondary characters represent aspects of the world, especially where it conflicts with the perspective of the protagonist, right? Secondary characters. And the resolution of this conflict is the learning experience for both the protagonist and the audience. And we learn along with them, right? In a safe environment. That's the idea behind it. So again, one of the things that we think about is this idea of inevitable surprise, okay? And think about that story. Why that story, we were trying to figure out why this guy who had everything going for him, he was strong, he was young, he was bigger, all these things, he wasn't able to chop wood. And then the inevitable surprise of this one was that, but yeah, it makes sense. How did I miss that? Of course. Or some of you came up with your own things like, hey, he stole the wood or something like that. Of course he stole the wood. He was smarter than the young guy, and that's why he was able to chop more wood in the first place, right? So this idea of surprise, it feels inevitable, of course, once it's been revealed, right? And that's another way we can learn. We learn by doing this stuff. So why are we saying these things? Why am I bringing these things to you? Not because I want to tie in all the narrative things that we've talked about this semester, but also because it works perfectly for mobile experiences, especially when it comes to educational games, right? We want to tie some of these aspects into our mobile game design, okay? So again, in video game design, we have a parallel concept specific to the design of complex system called emergence. That is an actual keyword that you might see. And again, sharing the Latin root of emergency, emergence has the built-in idea that it produces unexpected consequences. Again, if you saw it coming, you would have done something about it, and so it doesn't become an emergency. If the young guy was able to see, let's say, that the old man was stealing his wood, let's say if that was a thing, or he saw the old man sharpening his axe, if he actually paid attention to what the old man was doing, if he cared, right, then there wouldn't have been this emergence, this inevitable surprise that would have made it interesting for him. And he would have it would have actually ruined our story. Here's the setup. Remember, we also talked about this. Rui, when he came and talked to us about as a guest speaker, he talked about setup and payoff. He talks a lot about that. He says there's no setup. If there's no setup, right, then there can be no payoff, right? We can't have a payoff. The payoff is, the moral of the story, the inevitable surprise, the thing that happens at the end, right? And emergencies emerge out of complex situations a lot of times in video games with many interrelated parts, and kind of the way a surprising result can pop out of a complex game like SimCity. Here's a good example of SimCity Build It for mobile. It's actually, one of those, if you want to think about this, a resource gathering game that is in many ways paid to win, because you can speed up resource gathering like any one of these games are out there. It's free to play. You can download this for your your mobile phone right now if you wanted to. It's called SimCity Build It, and you'll see that getting going. The tutorial is pretty good. It uses a guide character that we talked about also this semester, and the guide character that is, or more than one guide character, gets us to understand how to play the game and so on. Jonathan says it's frustrating and to get to wait for materials to be built. Absolutely, and that's the way that they get you to get addicted to this thing. There's some great interactions, some good feedback, and everything else. It looks beautiful, but you don't want to wait. You want to go to the next level, because most of us want that feeling of progression, but we can't progress. The game is stopping us from progressing because it's asking us to wait. We don't like to wait, right? So we want to pay, and that's how they make their money. Pay to win. Absolutely. Right? And this is, kind of a frustrating situation. But some things like this, sometimes games like this can surprise us, with some kind of something that happens that is revealed that we don't know about. Okay? And in the desktop version of SimCity, where it wasn't pay to win, it was you actually paid for the game. Or if you look at any other kind of resource gathering game out there, right, there could be some surprises that come at you, as an example, where you have to react and respond to the surprise, like some kind of catastrophe. And I'm thinking games like Civilization, to some kind of cosmic event or something like that that completely throws you off, and you have to kind of you didn't see it coming, and now this is what this game has been kind of building up to the whole time. And again, the key to the moments are of surprise in a complex system-based game is there's two parts. One, the player understands the unexpected result, and the other thing is the player accepts the unexpected result, right? By the way, you could say the same thing for the little story I told you. Did you understand what the story was about? Most of you did. Did you accept it? Some of you didn't, right? And the thing is, until you do, right, then the experience, that learning thing, what ends up happening is that it's not as effective. That's the idea, right? Inevitable surprise reveals to us the complexity that we did not consider, perceive, or understand. That idea of inevitable surprise is really powerful. And observing that new logic into our world model, this idea of how things are in the real world, causes us to grow, even in a little bit, right? That's what it does. And this is learning. And it's why learning is the sprawling root system of the organisms we call storytelling and game design. Okay, this little diagram I put together for you, storytelling and game design as the roots, and then we make this beautiful game at the end. All right. So again, because storytelling for educational purposes, it taps into all these potential avenues for language-based expression, and it reaches into this creative space beyond language. It's huge. There's no way I can possibly do it any justice with a single lecture, because one thing what we're talking about is, we're trying to tap into this possibility space while considering some specific guidelines. Okay, so one of the things that we're saying is, hey guys, there's a huge opportunity here. Mobile is an opportunity. Educational games for mobile, that's a bigger opportunity. Why? The demographic size. It's huge, right? And we like to play puzzle games and those kind of things anyway, a lot of us. Why not play puzzle games to learn? So one of the things we have to know is, knowing our audience for educational games, and think about an entertainment game. Now we're classifying all the other games out there as entertainment type games, right? Such as Super Mario Brothers, right? And the playing audience can be really broad. Okay. But again, kids as young as 4 or 5 can play that game or something like it. And again, this is the old game. This is the 1985 version that I've played before. And again, this idea of visual and sound audio cues, right, and feedback, it's fairly universal. And at the idea is we're enjoying, physics-based challenges as well as puzzles that exist in this platformer, this kind of universal platformer, kind of like the father of all platformers, if you will, right? But it's a very generic, kind of general audience. It kind of can speak to many of us. By contrast, an effective learning game is laser specific. Okay, so we have to be really, really specific in terms of what we're offering, right? Again, Mario can be enjoyable. And even after it's mastered, you can come back and do some replayability. Remember, James talked about replayability in his courses, right? That was kind of one of the first things you guys might have learned in game design: replayability, that keyword, right? Again, the problem is that in learning games, replaying the game is like much less interesting, if not completely boring, right? In fact, once we figure out how to play a learning game, we're done. We're not coming back. The replayability for most learning games are 0, right? We're talking about, especially if it's something that's meant to be given to a kid, all right? We're not talking a learning game for adults. We're talking learning games for kids here, for an example. Why? Because once we figured out a skill, we're hungry for new learning. We've surpassed this thing. We want to go on to something else. And unless we have DLCs or unless we have many, many, many achievement levels in a game that can keep bringing us back to the game, right? Then we're done. And that is like death for the mobile game, right? So I'm just putting it out there to you. It's laser specific, and there's no replayability unless you add more challenge levels, okay? So again, what this does is it paints this very precise picture of an audience. What is our audience that we're designing for? And then we talk about this gap, right? Sometimes it's understanding our audience too, right? There could be a gap if we don't research carefully enough between the learning content that we develop and our interaction affordances, or call it the ability for us to have choice, or the illusion of choice that we talked about before, right? As an example, and this gap, right, can create this kind of dissonance, right, similar to something that's called ludonarrative dissonance. Hey guys, we're in the university. We have to talk about some terms that maybe some of you haven't heard before. And this ludonarrative dissonance, which really is a conflict between the video game's narrative told through the story and the narrative told through the gameplay. It's like there's a lot of examples out there of this ludonarrative dissonance that happens. And we can get that specifically for learning games, right? So we have, hey, this is the story and this is the gameplay, and they don't match at all. Okay. So again, it's also true that the younger the target audience, this is something else, the more precise the content target and the affordance target becomes. Here's an example, right? So it creates this other conundrum, right? A really younger target audience, right, has very much clearer goals. I know exactly what I want to teach younger kids. I want to teach them how to read. I want to teach them how to write. I want to teach them how to do math, those kind of things. And well understood. But what about their physical capabilities? They're learning not just, about what they're talking about, what we're trying to learn, what we're trying to teach them, the content, but also, right, they don't know how to use the device. The younger they are, their physical capabilities are very poor, right? I'm talking about kids that are 2, 3, 4 years old. They learn on mobile devices all the time, okay? So especially nowadays. Older kids, right? Hey, more physically capable. They can access different kinds of devices, no problem. They're the modern, media users. They can use any device, PC, Mac, mobile devices, whatever. But matching, their more complex learning content to game mechanics is way more challenging, like super challenging. Why? Because how am I going to present a game that's going to match up to Halo Infinite as an example and keep everyone interested in what they're learning for a kid that's 9? Because kids that are 9 that are going to play Halo Infinite, they're going to play the latest game as an example, right? I'm just saying, right? It's there, right? How do you challenge a kid that's played, every kind of game that's the modern game that you can possibly think of? And if you think that a lot of parents stop kids from playing games with blood and gore and all that stuff, I guarantee you that most parents do not, or they cannot, right? Because they don't understand what the kid's playing. They don't get it, right? So at the end of the day, right, it's difficult. It's difficult for us to target that, older kid. They're still kids, right? They got great capabilities, but how do I interest them? How do I engage them? How do I keep them playing? How do I keep them learning, right? Because imagine if I give my son a learning game like, hey, do a math game. He's going to look at me and he's going to say, come on, Dad, really? Like he said last time, he says, when we're playing that Good Night Story, he was like, you're playing a block game. Like he was really unimpressed. He was like, this is terrible. Why would you play a game like this? Or Candy Crush Saga? Daddy, it's a terrible game. Again, another important concept to bear in mind when it comes to kids is this idea of Lexile level. You may have not heard this term at all, but a Lexile level, what is it? It applies to...
I couldn't find any enabled video skills.
See what happens?
Do that.
She couldn't find any enabled videos. My little personal assistant here, she picked up what I said. She thought I said something else. I said Lexile level, right? And so really what they've done is English...
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
See, she doesn't know. She doesn't understand how to help me. English language educators, what they've done is they've identified various dimensions of language, such as vocabulary, sentence length, grammatical complexity, and all this other stuff, and that makes a given piece of text more or less challenging to read. This is the level that we're talking about. I'm not going to say it again because it's going to activate her, right? But really, there's a few things to know. There's the framework, which is something that we can use for reading as an educational tool that uses a measure called a Lexile. Damn, I said it. To match.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. To match readers with books, articles, and other leveled reading resources, right? That's what you want to do. And there's also a measure of that, which is defined as the numeric representation of an individual's reading ability or a text readability or difficulty, followed by an L. I don't know why they use the L, if we know what it is. There's also an analyzer, which is a software program that you can actually input a piece of text, and it'll kind of output, as an example, what is the reading level that this piece of text implies. And a lot of times what you can do is there's some tools online, right, that you can go online, and free tools, by the way, that you can put in a piece of text that you have in your game to make sure that it is targeting the right audience, right? Otherwise, if you put in some words that are either too low, in terms of complexity, or, too difficult, sentences that are sentence structure, grammar, and so on, that's too complex, you'll lose your audience. Again, it comes back to research, right? But one of the things I wanted to put in here is from Amazon, from Wikipedia. What they talked about is some examples of some books with Lexile measures. Damn, I said that word again. Hopefully she won't turn on. So Green Eggs and Ham is a measure of 210, right? Whereas when we look further up, and I did read The Hobbit to my kid. I feel bad now. I don't know why I did this, but I read it to him, and it was like 1,000, right? So that's like maybe more than I should have done. I probably should have stuck with something like Charlotte's Web, which is actually quite complex as well, if you actually read Charlotte's Web. Twilight from Stephanie Meyer is like 720, just a bit above Charlotte's Web. You can see who that's targeting as an example. But, books like A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking is, 1290. This range, I think, goes up to 2200 or something like that. So you can see the range in terms of understanding and sentence structure. So that's something to keep in mind. We're talking about learning, and we're talking about target audience. We can't put sentences together and dialogue that is outside of the bounds or below the bounds that we're targeting. Okay. So again, one of the things we want to think about when designing for educational game is, or creating any kind of content intended to be experienced in school, is integrating with pedagogy. Oh, there's a word to say, pedagogy. When I first read that word, I was like, is that pedagogy? It's not. It's pedagogy, right? And really what pedagogy means is the method and practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject or theoretical concept. That's what pedagogy is. And at a minimum, things to consider are, for teachers, if you're teaching, if you're kind of integrating your mobile app as an example, as a teaching app, then we have to think about something like, oh, Ryan's asking, what is the AD? It's adult guidance, I think is what it is. Adult guidance at 460, right? So classes are short. Many students use the same device, even now. Like, example, I was asked by my kids' school, they say, could you do a Blender, I'm not joking around, a Blender workshop for kids who are in grade, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm like, sure, I can do a Blender workshop for kids 3, 4, 5, 6. Do they have a laptop? And they're like, oh, no, they have a Chromebook. Like, yeah, no, it's not going to happen. We're not going to do a Blender workshop for kids in grades 3, 4, 5, 6 with Chromebooks. We're going to ask them to bring laptops from home, right? So, yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? The other thing is that teachers are busy, right? So when we think about how we create our learning materials, we want to think about how it can interface nicely or integrate with their curriculum, right? As an example. Yeah, Blender workshop with Chromebooks is impossible. I wouldn't say it's difficult. And impossible unless somehow the Chromebook is connected to some kind of virtual machine on the other end. And even then, it would be a terrible experience. So, all right. So again, what we want to do is integrate our story into our learning game, right? And what we want to do is we want to use classroom materials to supplement our game. Now, again, you might put your hand up here and say, wait a minute. If I got to use classroom materials really to supplement my game, is my game any good in the first place? But again, you got to think about the context. If I'm making a game that's going to be used in classrooms, right, then the teacher has to follow up when my game is done, right? Remember, my game is going to have very short life. It's going to be used for a certain purpose. And after the game is done, we should have some kind of assessment from the game because it's a learning type game that comes out of it. And then from there, we want to add to this idea of a holistic learning experience by adding additional materials that go along with the game, whether they're online materials or, God forbid, handouts, right? That we sometimes have. And sometimes also what we want to do is we want to have some materials that are interactive. So again, example, it might be something like get the students to draw pictures of the characters in the game, or write short stories or journal entries about the characters that they see in the game. Matthew says, run it with Linux and have it crash every 2 minutes due to no RAM. Hey, listen, the funny thing is about Blender 2.9, when I run it on my crazy system that I have here, unless I run it in administrative mode, it runs like the startup is like super slow. That's just the way it works for me. All right. So here's something. So again, in the best circumstances, making a learning game involves at least one and possibly two new disciplines or two new roles, if you will, that, are already in a busy multidisciplinary kind of environment that is video game making, right? We have two new roles. One of them is the learning designer, which is also called sometimes the curriculum designer, right? And what they do is they come from a different backgrounds. Sometimes they have some kind of upper level degree in education. They might have a master's in education or something else like that. And they might have some practical experience in teaching, as an example, at different levels, whatever target audience you're targeting itself, they might have experience doing that. They could be a teacher themselves. And we also might need something called assessment designers. So, hey, we've made our learning game. How do I make a proper assessment? That's a whole skill of itself. It's like, imagine if you're the professor and you're making your own assessment for university. You want to make your own assignment. How can you make it fair? And that's one of the things I've always been challenged with. How can you make an assessment fair? How can you make it so that the amount of time that someone spends, doing that assessment is worth it for the marks that they're going to get? that is a whole skill unto its own, right? So you have these new roles. They're called assessment designers. It could be the same person. It could be the learning designer and the assessment designer are one, or sometimes there's totally different people because they have an outcome that they wish for the game, to kind of meet some kind of outcome, a learning outcome. We're kind of getting into the last point of this stuff. So types of educational games. This might be an update issue. Just tested mine and it started within 2 to 3 seconds. I wish, but I don't know what it is. I've updated it just like you. I haven't updated for a while. Maybe the newer updates might be, part of the problems. I'll check it out for sure. Let's get back to type of educational game. So there's really 4 types that I want to talk about here. Okay. One is humanities. So again, this kind of game is a game where you learn to read, you learn to love reading, that kind of stuff. It might include things like fictional environments where choices really matter, like, because you want to read those choices and you want to select the right choice, as an example. Okay. It might also include things like philosophy, right? So, and as well as this idea of a lean forward experience that requires interaction to progress the story, right? Not a lean backward. Leaning backward, these are keywords again, these are fancy terms, but leaning backward means I lean backward when I'm watching something. If I'm doing a download, if I'm watching something on YouTube a lot of times and it's just for entertainment purposes, I'm leaning backward. Leaning forward means I have to be engaged. Okay? That's what they want. They want student engagement. Math, that's another type of game. So problem solving, they include problem solving a lot of times. There are a lot of times it's puzzles. They may include things like a way of visually representing abstract concepts. They might use other metaphors to represent problem and solution. Okay, that's what math games kind of do, right? As an example, here's an example, math versus zombies as an alternate, right? You want to play math, you get the right answer, and you're able to shoot down a zombie. Zombies are okay to shoot down, just like Nazis. All right, let's continue. And then there's science games, right? They include things like characterization, personification, and contextual characters a lot of times. World building, immersive worlds, where they want to get you to understand the environment. A lot of times science is very immersive, right? Jonathan says, but is it really okay to shoot down Nazis? Yes, it is. Okay, I think you should. If there's a true Nazi, I'm joking, of course. We don't want to shoot anyone. Let the Nazi hunters do it all, not us. In real life, anyway. In the video games, you can enjoy doing that and pretending, but in real life, we don't want to shoot anybody. All right. Pattern recognition is also part of science. A lot of this pattern recognition also works with math. So we see games that have a lot of pattern recognition in both. Okay. And here's a game called Carbon Capture. Carbon Capture is a game where you understand the carbon footprint that each effect has on the world. And the last one, last type is social skills type games. Okay, so this is a big one. And again, it's used for younger people as well as some people that have social interaction problems. And let's think about what this is. It's what they entail are social and emotional learning. All right. So again, usually for younger people, but can also apply to older people, adults that have challenges or if they have some kind of emotional or mental health issues. There's stuff like that as well. So things like, SEL or social and emotional learning has been classified by CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And they define it as this. They say that it's the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. I think this is a good one for all of us, guys. I think sometimes not all of us make these. I'm saying me too. Not all of us make these exact things. I think these games are for everybody, right? If you think about it. And they also include elements like that really fortify things like active listening, self-awareness, teamwork, ethical responsibility, and they also include character-based story experiences a lot of times, just like we talked about with the young man and the old man. right? So kind of parables and these kind of things, right? And they kind of ask you questions like, a lot of times, when I think about social and emotional learning, I think about the GOAT test on Fallout 4. I know it's funny, but whenever I thought about this, and I was making a joke about it when I was putting these PowerPoints together, and I was like, this is like a GOAT test, right? What would you do if, and this kind of thing. And but seriously, what these can do for us is this is a category of games that you can create for different different demographics again, and there's a demand for these things. Okay. I want to just end this part off by talking about educational games for adults and some, I guess, popular ones that are out there right now, if you look them up. And this is kind of a short list of some of those, all right, that exist today, 2021. All right, so that is the end of the talk for educational games for mobile and how to design for educational games. So any questions, comments about some of the topics we've kind of discussed so far today? So yeah, I mean, I think there's a great opportunity. I think that's how I'd like to end off this piece. There's a great opportunity for you as developers using Unity and maybe even Unreal Engine in the future to create different kinds of games, not just games for entertainment and not just games for healthcare, but games for education. And there's a huge market for that. And if that's how you're inclined, it's pretty awesome. All right, last part for today before we get into our tech demo. Well, I'll make another video for that. In our case study, I talked about this way before. I'll do a brief case study on tabletop gaming. Again, whenever we do case studies like this, I want to talk about what would you learn, what kind of things can you learn from a tabletop experience that you can bring into mobile, to console, and to other social games, because tabletop gaming is still one of the most social activities that you can do today, right? Again, barring the fact that we have the human malware that's still out there that's preventing us from being together, kind of 100%. And it's going to get better. I really feel it's going to get better in 2022. And it'll allow us to get back to doing things like doing tournaments live and those kind of things, which is, kind of very exciting. So what is Warhammer 40K? It's a miniature war game. I've been talking about it throughout the semester a little bit here and there. I would say I agree with this. That comes from Wikipedia. It says it's the most popular miniature war game in the world, particularly in the UK. And the first edition was published in 1987. I didn't play it back then. I started in at third edition as an example. And ninth is the current edition that was released in 2020, right? Which is pretty cool. And what is it? Really what it is you enact battles on a tabletop model of the battlefield. So here's an example of the battlefield. And this is what looks like a tournament. That's what it looks like. This is typical of a tournament, by the way. Jonathan says, all I know is an emperor, Space Marines, angry fan base, Tyranids, chaos gods. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. They have a huge narrative here for sure. But basically what you do is you have this like tabletop, and you add models that include things like hills, terrain, terrain of trees. Let me come back. And for those people who are here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show on YouTube, and I'll switch back and forth from YouTube to whatever, a couple of models here that I have. I'm just going to go and get them and come back, right? So talking about terrain, and on YouTube I'm showing this now. There is a piece of terrain here that was created. I don't know if I can see this. It's pretty bad. But basically this piece of terrain, and I'll show it in a second as well. Show this so it doesn't fade out. It's because of my black screen. But basically there's a piece of terrain that's been created. It's terrible. It looks bad. But what it is this was actually created by Rui, one of the people that came in. So let me show you what that looks like for people that are physically here. So let's see if it's any better for you guys. And there it is. There's that piece of terrain. So this piece of terrain here, this is something like a temple. He actually sculpted this thing out. It's kind of hard to see. It's kind of blocking, but he kind of sculpted this out with, out of styrofoam, actually, is what he did. And we kind of add these actual terrain pieces to the game, and it creates things like cover and a bunch of other stuff. And it's realistic. It's kind of like a diorama that allows us to kind of put our miniatures in different places and do things like calculate line of sight and a lot of the things that you might see in video games. I'll be right back with the next thing. A little bit of show and tell today. All right. And sometimes we use this axe. I'm joking. We don't use the axes, the axe of the gods. But actually what we do is we have other models like this, right? As an example, this would be a scrapjet that is for orcs, right? It's not a human sacrifice. It's the axe from God of War. Come on. It was the best, Halloween prop that I could possibly muster. All right, that's what it was. So here we go. This is the scrapjet. Again, this is a model that you would use. One model. It could be part of a larger unit. Units in the game are one or more models. And what you do is you would build these things and I'll talk about how that's done. And I'll also show this on YouTube. So for YouTube, see if I can actually do this a little better. Again, there's a scrapjet, right? There we are. So that's what it looks like, right? So actually, maybe I'll do that. I'll show you my actual background for this one. So the scrapjet is just for the orc army. And this is an example of a model that you would use, in the game. Okay. All right. So that's that one. So cool. We've got models, right, and all that kind of stuff. And what we do is with the models, we create this virtual battlefield. And in the virtual battlefield, this like physical battlefield that we see, each player takes turns. They move their model warriors throughout the battlefield, pretend that they're fighting their opponent's warriors, and we roll a bunch of 6-sided dice. It's all 6-sided dice that look like this, okay? And there's a bunch of narrative, okay? So narrative, Warhammer 40K, just like Jonathan said, set in the dark future, right? Where pretty much everybody's evil. It doesn't matter whether you're playing a Marine or an Orc or a Tyrannid or a Necron or whatever you are, everyone's evil, right? It's almost like they have this narrative where the core worlds, the worlds that are governed by the Emperor, as an example, they're all clean and beautiful worlds, and anything out in the outer rim, they're just terrible marauders and death. Okay, that's what exists out there. And they create these transhumans, and I mean transhumans as in like humans that have multiple organs or extra organs, all this kind of stuff. That's these special Marines where they feel no pain, where they have all this, kind of extra tech that's on them. They're 9 feet tall. They're super soldiers that are basically created to fight, other crazy creatures of the future. That's what this whole narrative is all around. There's been a ton of books that have been written about these guys through this something called the Black Library that's also published by Games Workshop. Games Workshop are the owners of Warhammer 40K. Okay, so that's what the narrative is all about. So like I said, everybody's evil. Okay, there are no good guys and bad guys. They're all bad guys. So that way, if you want to play against somebody else and you happen to be, Astra Militarum, which is the guard, traditional Imperial Guard, or if you're fighting orcs, whether you're orcs or guard or Marines or whatever, everyone's bad. Right? So that's the thing to think about. And when I talk to people that I play with, I'm like, yeah, but wait, I'm the orcs. I'm the bad guy. They'll always say to me, no, we're all bad. Don't worry about it. Right? I like Tau as well. They're very interesting, and so are Adeptus Mechanicus. They're the most interesting nowadays to look at, for sure, although recently they got nerfed. Let's take a look at why people play and, kind of do anything to do with Warhammer 40K. There's the triple threat here. This is something that is not always in existence for all games we play now, right? Here's the triple threat. Miniature modeling, right? miniature painting and basing, and then war gaming and strategic play. Aaron, you had a question? You came off of mute. Maybe it's by accident? Yeah, all right. I was hoping you were going to say something, but that's okay. So here's the triple threat. So miniature modeling, you get a sprue, all right, that looks like kind of like this, or kind of like a template that you have to cut out. So basically you take this template and you use some cutting tools, you cut everything out, you assemble everything, you add glue, and you get a Marine. Okay, that's pretty much how you do it. No problem, Aaron. All right, so that's what happens here. You get a Marine, right? And these little Marines, notice that there is a base for the Marine and the model itself. You can arrange this model in different configurations. You can pose them different ways depending on the model, as an example. And you can even pre-paint a lot of this stuff and put it on. Some of the most more advanced modelers do a lot of painting beforehand as well. But typically the process for a lot of us is something like this. We model, we glue, we assemble, we glue, and we have a model at the end. This takes hours, guys, to do it properly, because sometimes we have to sand surfaces anywhere where it's connected to the template. As an example, there's a little bit of a bump. We get a sand or cut that out as we put everything together on the Marine. Next stage is miniature painting. So some people love to build models. Huge, right? They love to build models, and that's all they love to do, right? As an example. And the next one is painting. So you get your models that have been assembled, you add a pile of paints to them. There's two different ways to paint nowadays, right? There's the classic way and there's the contrast way. And I can tell you that painting a simple, Marine like this, you might need this many paints, no problem. For each Marine, each one of these things, you're going to paint a little bit here and there, because it's not just the colors, the base colors, but also a lot of other stuff to get it to this point. To get it to that, man, you won't even get it to as good as what it seems here, right? And I'll talk about this on the Games Workshop website. Then there's basing, right? There's different kinds of bases you can use, and they have a texture. So you put the base on, you paint it, as an example as well. You can do a dry brush, different techniques for brushing and painting. The brushing and painting techniques you use for these models are varied. Different layers are involved. So we start off with a undercoat. Usually we do some kind of thing like Chaos Black or Mechanicus Gray, one of those kind of things. And then depending on what coat is closer to the color that you wish to get, there's also, kind of a spray. You can also do things like with different other kinds of tools, an airbrush. Some people use that as well. And then you get to you've got your base coat, you add layers on top of your base coat until you have, your model so that it is something called combat ready. And let me show you that. So if you go to the website for Games Workshop, again, this is if you're interested in the actual hobby itself. And if you go to painting and modeling, right, as an example, it basically talks about the Citadel color system, right? And the Citadel color system, Citadel actually was the people who originally owned, Games Workshop, and it kind of evolved, right? And Citadel creates things like basing materials like skulls. You can see the costs; they're quite expensive. In fact, one thing I failed to mention is that, if you haven't seen it already, is that this hobby, Warhammer 40K, there's the hobby aspect and there's the gaming aspect. The hobby aspect alone, just to get going on the hobby part, is hundreds of dollars. There is no quick and easy way to do it, right? And if you look at something like a model, let's suppose I go to the Warhammer 40K side, right? And if I go to Space Marines, let's just make a standard Space Marine, okay, as an example. So I look at standard Space Marine. Here's your heavy intercessors, as an example. This is what the model should look like. Guys, the model, you'll never get it to this good, because the model requires a bunch of things that you cannot possibly do with a standard level of skill, okay? Here's an example. They have a nice 360 for you to look at. Take a look at what they've done to this model. So what I mean by that is, it's not just the base paint, but they also make it look worn. They also add edging. This is per model. If you have an army of 300 models, all right, we're talking about hours and hours and hours of prep and work and rework and touch-ups and a bunch of other stuff that goes way beyond any kind of 3D modeling you can possibly think of, guys. I'm telling you, it's insane. It's that meticulous. All right. And it's interesting how this was done. If you scroll down, they also show you the colors. So here's an example of how to paint heavy intercessors. Okay. No joke. And this is the classic method, right? So you start off with Chaos Black as an example. You can see that this requires you to, the base is Abaddon Black. Then you add a layer, which is Dawnstone as an example. And in order for you to get it to battle ready, right? If you want to do gunmetal for their guns, you had a base which is Lead Belcher. Look at the prices, $540. A shade, which is like a wash that you put on top of the Lead Belcher, which is that you do with another type of brush. And then this is again just to take it to battle ready. It won't look like this. It will never look like this, right? In order for you to get it to look like that, you either need to use the contrast method, which is way more complex, or you need to get yourself up to parade ready. So if I look at the blue color for Ultramarines armor, you can see that there are 4 paints that are used for every Ultramarine, right? To get it to parade ready. Crag Blue, Null Noil as a shade, which is just a wash, right? Calgar Blue as a layer, a highlight, that's what those are. And then Fenrisian Gray as edging. Edging, guys, on the edges of the model. Okay, that's what we're talking about. All right, it's pretty crazy. All right, so that's per Marine that we're talking about. So going back to that, now that you know a little bit of what I'm saying when I say painting, and basing is a whole other art, not just making it look like this, but adding things like grass and other kinds of rocks, skulls, tiles that are broken. As an example, people paint Marines different colors depending on the squad or the clan culture that you're into. It's pretty crazy to get them to this point. So that is miniature painting and basing. That is like, you know, the second reason why people do this kind of stuff. People just love painting. Other people love building. And the third group loves playing. Okay, so there's a couple of videos here. I'm not going to play them here on how to play Warhammer 40K 9th edition. There's a couple of really great videos from different people. You know, so awesome. I would say if you want to take a look at the basics on how to play, they're here. And the other thing that we need when we play Warhammer 40K is some kind of tool like Battlescribe. Because again, a lot of times what we want to do is when we compete, we want to build armies that have point values, right? So I have my point values and I want to balance them with what you play on your side with your point value. So example, if I play a patrol, which is 500 points, I want my army and all of the models and the units of my army to tally up to 500 points, let's say as an example, to compete with your army to make sure that we're in a balanced or matched play scenario. Most of the time it's like that. That is a very, very, very high level overview of Warhammer 40K. The rules are complex. The supplements that they come up for each faction. So if I want to play orcs, they have their own rule set. If I want to play Ultramarines, they have their own rule set. Astra Militarum has their own rule set, and they have many, many different ones. And here's an example of all the ones that they have. If I click on Warhammer 40K, it is Armies of the Imperium, this many rules. Armies of Chaos, this many types of factions. Xenos armies, right? Terrain, different kinds of terrain that you have to paint and base. Rules for all this stuff and how everything ties together. It can look epic. If you actually go to a tournament and if you see this stuff all put together, it can look epic, and turns can take an hour. Each turn can take an hour or more. So you got to think about it. If you're playing against another army that has 2,000 points, the game can take 3 or 4 hours. And that's just you making 3 or 4 or 5 turns. And that's it. And you're done. And have you spent, think about this, months preparing, buying, spending your money, painting, basing, and getting rule sets together, creating lists, and looking up online and researching, similar to what we do with playing Magic the Gathering and other kinds of games that way, because we want to be competitive. Let's face it, we want to be OP, right? Over the top, and to beat the other person on the other end, and somehow have a great time doing it. If you're thinking about, wow, this would be a great game to pull into, you know, and to create for mobile or for on Steam, it's been done to death. one thing that I want to tell you is the one bad thing about Games Workshop and Warhammer 40K or Warhammer Age of Sigmar or whatever, or they even own Middle Earth, the IP for Middle Earth as well. It's been done to death. They go to the highest bidder. The game quality, I would say, is fairly mediocre at best. Sometimes you get some really good stuff, but it doesn't represent all the factions. I don't think any Warhammer player of any worth has ever looked at a game that's a video game and gone, yeah, it's awesome. And the reason why is because Games Workshop, the owner of the IP for Warhammer 40K, does not allow their IP to be directly used in any video game. Why? Because they want you to buy the models and the paints, because primarily they're a modeling and painting shop. That's what they want compared to anything else. All right, just wanted to bring that up. That's your case study on Warhammer 40K. Any questions? What can we learn from this is the question I have from you. What things can we bring in? So what? Even though we can't use the IP from Warhammer 40K, there's a lot to learn from these guys. If I want to make a mass battle happen with D&D, it gives me a lot of, thoughts about creating my own mass battle rules for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. They don't have rules like that in 5th edition, right? The other thing is it's visceral, right? We can actually physically feel the models in our hands. We can see the representation of our characters, right? And all that kind of stuff as well, right? If you're interested in making models for D&D, custom models, there's custom model outfits out there. You can make your own custom miniature. And one of them that you can access is something called Hero Forge, right? So Hero Forge allows you to make custom models, right, of your own type. You can actually create them. They laser print them. Here's a model that was done for one of the characters in one of our games, right, as an example. It's a custom model that they, what they do is they 3D print it, and they ship it to you a lot of times, and they ship it to you unpainted, and then you take the time to paint it up the exact same way. They include a base or not. It's up to you, and you can use Hero Forge. It's a WebGL application that allows you to create any of the models you want. You can also download them and pay for the models that you create here with Hero Forge to print on your 3D printer. So very, very interesting. If you're interested in making your own models for Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games, you can do that as well. But I feel that when you're getting together for desktop role-playing, and if you have a model that you're using, the great thing about that is you can visualize the board. And a lot of times the stuff that we use, miniatures that we use in D&D, come right back from the old miniature games, the old wargaming side of the house where D&D grew up from in the first place. So guys, this is like full circle. We talked about Dungeons and Dragons as the very first case study. We talked about Chainmail as is what the original game was called, and it was a miniature game. Citadel, back in the day, made miniatures for Dungeons and Dragons. They still make miniatures for Dungeons and Dragons today, by the way, right? But that was where they came out of. And we made rules, role-playing rules, to play those miniatures. And on the other side, we've evolved to create these strategy games using miniatures, right? To play Warhammer 40K and so on. Again, super expensive hobby, but there can be a lot of rewards. If you're an artist, I'll tell you that disconnecting from the real world and doing things like modeling, painting, basing, and all that stuff without ever playing once, right, can be quite rewarding on its own, because at the end of the day, you have a model to show for it. Okay, that's my talk on all this stuff. I don't want to talk about it anymore, but that's it. Any questions around any of this stuff or comments? So again, really exciting stuff. There's a great amount of things out there that you can try out. And I think playing any game is amazing for the game developer, because a lot of times we can take elements of those games that we see, those social aspects, things that capture the hearts and minds of people that are playing these things in real life, and bring them inside of our video games. Something that we want to capture. This semester, I've asked you to try role-playing. I've tried to get you guys to do that so you understand what it's like to role-play around a tabletop. And I think there's a different experience than playing than doing a role-playing game, an RPG, and a video game. That's what I've asked you to do, and that's what this stuff, these little case studies, are all about. Okay, so that is this content today. We're sitting at this part right here. What I'm going to do now is it's 8:24. I'm going to reset and I'm going to do a small tech demo on basically how to make an animated UI, both with the animator controller in Unity for mobile, as well as using the timeline to animate stuff. Okay, so we're going to do that in the tech demo. Any questions before we stop recording this session and go to the next one? All right, let's stop on YouTube, and I'm going to go and record that session next. Okay, let me just reset, guys, as I do that.